Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome back for another edition of Investor Stories. On this special segment, the experts describe the most important lesson that they've learned and how that has changed the way they invest. This is the special segment called Lessons Learned. On today's special segment, we have Janet Bannister of Real Ventures. Janet, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
I think one of the lessons that I've learned is really the importance of building a strong relationship with founders and understanding where they are coming from. I think that earlier when I started out in venture capital, and it's easy to do this, is you sort of play the role of an investor with the investor on one side and the founder on the other. But what I've learned is that really the way to be successful is first and foremost to have a strong, trusted bond with your founders so that they understand that you are looking out for their best interest and you're on their side. And, there's an expression, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that is absolutely true in venture. And what you don't want to be is you don't want to be the investor who entrepreneurs are scared of, or who the founders are not 100% authentic because they feel that they need to impress you or make you happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then you don't get the full story.
Exactly.
On this special segment, we have Simeon Iheagwham of Nomis Ventures. Simeon, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
Yes, critical lesson. I think with the learning of our company failing, one company failing, it has allowed us to sort of now understand, the checkbox in the framework where we take a look at, potential risk and stuff down the road, and starting to understand ways in which companies can essentially pivot, I think is important. So that has added to my learning as an investor and my ability to advise companies going forward. And so, realizing that and promoting our companies to think about ways that they can find additional revenue streams has been helpful. And in fact, one of our companies, faced that same problem during COVID. They're in the on-demand manufacturing space for knitwear. So COVID hit, of course, a lot of retailers were going to face a lot of issues, but they were doing on-demand manufacturing using 3D knitting technology. They ultimately decided that their 3D knitting technology can be used for more. So they decided to create their first direct-to-consumer product. And they knitted a breathable face mask with replaceable filters and actually found themselves producing several thousand unit orders and having some of their best revenue months in April and May, when we were pretty much knee deep in COVID.
Amazing.
So we've gotten learnings from a lot of our companies, the failures, the companies who have gone on to raise Series C's and exited. We take all of that and we continue to refine the framework that we use to evaluate the companies that we invest in.
Continuous improvement, right?
Yes, sir.
On today's Investor Stories segment, we have Somesh Dash of IVP. Somesh, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
Sure. So, one of the first investments I made when I came back from my MBA program was a company called Business Insider, which you're probably familiar with. And it was with an entrepreneur, Henry Blodgett, who's very well known as a media personality. The reason it was an important lesson was when I first approached the investment, Henry was a very well-known securities analyst from Merrill Lynch. As you probably know well, Nick, he made some, actually, in hindsight, very correct calls on Amazon that were controversial at the time. And unfortunately got rolled up by a long investigation led by Elliot Spitzer, who's then in the state, it was in New York. And, really, it was a really tough thing to see, a person who was young in his career and successful basically be disbarred from the securities industry and really kind of shunned, to be honest. He had, with the help of Kevin Ryan and Dwight Merriman, be part of Ali Corp, which spawned off, by the way, companies like MongoDB and Gil and all these amazing companies. And Kevin is someone you should absolutely get on the pod if you haven't already. But Henry, really had this vision for what publishing, blogging would evolve to. And he knew at the time that the way people were consuming entertainment and celebrity news, that business leaders and founders were going to be actually not just their companies and the financials, but the stories of them and sort of how they were doing what they're doing were going to be really exciting. Now, mind you, this is years before the social network came out. Right. And now it seems very obvious. But the virality of the slideshows, the long form pieces they pioneered, they were early on the video kind of vignette bandwagon. And the two things I took away from Henry was, people really want to prove themselves, and entrepreneurs have a chip on their shoulder. And when they feel doubt, like when people doubt them, I mean, the confidence it requires, the belief they have in themselves actually grows exponentially. And so just seeing his tenacity to get back, I think was just incredible. And, to my earlier point, you have to think a little bit about, who has advice that's helpful and who doesn't. A lot of people, so-called pundits, said, you don't want to touch him. He's damaged goods in this company. But, I trusted my instincts. In meeting him, I just saw how transparent he was, how forthright, how much conviction he had, and how high integrity he was. Like in my 5 years working on that board, I mean, just the highest of integrity in terms of the way he dealt with shareholders and thought about their interests besides the company's, and continues to be a great friend and someone that we hope spins out and starts another company someday that we can back. That's the circle of venture ecosystem. So that was definitely a special one and a critical lesson I learned.
On today's special segment, we have Jonathan Su of Tribe Capital. Jonathan, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
Weirdly, is much earlier in my career. So I didn't start out in finance. I didn't do any investing. I was a physicist, for heaven's sake, right? Early on when I was just leaving Facebook, I started trying to learn real estate. So I bought a bunch of houses in Texas and I rent them out. But I bought them. I've never seen them. I've never laid eyes on these houses, and I treated it like a purely analytical problem. Okay, wow. Here's an analytical problem. How do I gain conviction to do this? And so there's a combination of math, right? But then there's this other side of it that's like, okay, I'm hiring a property manager. How do I trust this person? How do I develop confidence that this person is going to, manage the assets, honestly, and so on and so forth? How do I develop a view on the market overall? And that was really important for me because real estate is the original form of investing. I wouldn't want to do it all day long, but I think it's important to know how it works because that's OG. If how can we call ourselves investors if we don't even know how the most basic form of investing works?
Wow. How did it turn out?
Oh, it's turning out great. I still have all three of them. I just refinanced all three of them a month ago for the second time, I think. Wow. They're good. I mean, they yield some rent. They have decent yield, and the macro has been okay. And I don't, like I said, I don't really want to necessarily do a whole bunch of it, but it's more an exercise, right? What does it feel like to put money at risk in something that you've never seen before?
More or less work than you thought overall?
Well, more work, but then once you've done, you mean now that I own them?
Yes.
About what I expected in that they require no work because I have a good property manager.
Oh, good. So the property managers haven't turned over at all.
Yeah. The thing is this, my thinking on I remember when I was trying to figure out property managers, I was reading all this Warren Buffett. And if you read it, how Warren Buffett thinks about picking a good CEO for their subsidiary companies, I was trying to take that. It's okay, how do you trust them and how do you know they're doing a good job? I'm not saying that my property manager is as great as a CEO of Geico or anything, but there's a lot of lessons that you can take from sort of reading about how others have chosen managers, how others assess, managerial competence. And, I used a lot of that I use that continually to try to, frame how I work with our property manager. And it's kind of like a little toy example, right? It's not the same thing as you lead a Series A. Okay, now you're on the board. You have this founder there you're seeing all the time. It's a toy example version. But doing the toy examples are oftentimes really helpful because they give you a sense of some bigger sort of set of issues that you may face in some other context.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.